the policy conversations are so important. As we've been reading about AI, the policy implications of AI are far reaching. Some regions are moving faster than others, Europe being one of them. But there is a lot happening at the domestic here in the United States, and anything that's happening around the globe from a regulatory standpoint impacts all of us. And we are very fortunate today to have a really outstanding panel that has a view of AI and policy at the global level. Some of us are tuning in from overseas. So I am very, very happy to introduce our panel, let them introduce themselves. I'm going to start off with Kim Lucy at Microsoft. Kim, please introduce us, tell us your role there, and a little bit about your life in the AI policy world.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to be part of this. My name's Kim Lucy. I work at Microsoft in our corporate standards group. So what our team does is work on primarily ISO IEC standards. We've recently worked on a big one that many of you may have heard of, ISO IEC 42001, which is the AI management system, otherwise known as AIMS. So that's getting a lot of press lately. It's kind of the first standard that's come out that can offer organizations something to certify to for responsible AI. And like I said, what my team does at Microsoft is really engages in these international standards processes. And so we do a lot of work in the international space, looking at the interplay between regulation, policy internally to Microsoft, policies across the world, and international standards. I, in particular, look at the role of governance, risk, and compliance, and how the kind of GRC ecosystem comes to play within the standards world and across that relationship between policy, regulation, and standards. So really excited to be here and take part in this conversation.
Thank you, Kim, so much. And you mentioned that standard. We will be linking some of these in the chat as well. And just so everyone is aware, you will be getting a copy of this webinar and a transcript, and then any other information that was discussed today will go out in an email to you. So we're taking notes for you as well as you take notes along. Also, be sure to let us know where you're tuning in from. It's great to see people coming in from around the world. All right, Mr. Scarpelli, we're going to go to you next. Please tell us more about you and ACT and what you're working on.
Great. Yeah, I agree. By the way, hello, Tampa. I see in the chat. No, thank you so much. It's really honor to be here. Hi, I'm Brian Scarpelli. I'm a senior global policy counsel, a lawyer, for better or worse, with a trade association called ACT, the App Association. We're a not-for-profit advocacy organization that represents the interests of small and medium-sized innovators, tech developers, across a wide range of policy debates and issues, be they debates occurring about the role of the government, or even more policy and governance issues outside of that. And I think, organizational even, like Kim was just kind of talking about. We're based in Washington, D.C., and the membership that the segment, I guess, of the industry, the membership that we have, extremely interesting, as diverse as they can be in every way possible, different people from different walks of life, different geographies, all who are, basically innovating in the digital economy. Inevitably, right, no matter whether a member of ours is in a consumer vertical or a enterprise vertical, some business to business type idea that they're developing on, the role of AI is becoming, it's a necessity and increasing. So there's great excitement about all of those efficiencies and opportunities related to those efficiencies. At the same time, from a governance perspective, both from the US government or state governments and even local governments, and organizations, there's also as understandably concerned about potential harms, potential new angles. So walking that, that tightrope in the policy discussions is something that we have to do. We've as an organization, I'm actually still very excited about this. We've been able to pull together really strong consensus across all of our members on some core principles and ideas about the way that we see successful AI governance happening in a way that ensures safety, efficacy, the detection and mitigation of bias, and also enables entrepreneurship and growth and et cetera. So, and we'll get more into that, but that's a little bit about myself and my org. So I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Brian. Really appreciate it. Danielle, tuning in from London, England. Please tell us more about you and what you're doing at Salesforce.
Yeah, so thank you so much, and greetings from the UK. My name is Danielle Gilliam-Moore. I'm the Director of Global Public Policy at Salesforce. I've been with the company quite some time, so I remember when I really had to go into the brass tacks of like what Salesforce does, but I'll just say now on 7 years later, we are a CRM company that is now combining the power of AI, data, and with trust delivering insights for our enterprise customers so that they can sell and service and market to their customers in a whole new way. And so, we are a CRM company, but we are really leaning into AI these days, and we're trying to do it in an ethical way, but also ensure that our customers really understand what the power of AI really is. But in my role as the Director of Global Public Policy, I have an internal and an external facing role. Internally, I am helping our company understand what does the regulatory space look like. And I don't just mean hard and fast laws. I also do mean codes of conduct, frameworks, all the different vehicles that lawmakers around the world seem to be using to try and deliver safe AI to their citizens. And then, in the external aspect, what I'm doing is helping Salesforce put together globally consistent and clear policy recommendations on issues like AI, but I also work on privacy and cybersecurity and export controls, so a whole waterfront of policy issues, because we really do believe that, a company like Salesforce that really does serve a lot of different sectors, whether they be highly regulated or smaller companies, we think that we really do have a unique view. And AI is, although it is something that is made up of a lot of different issues that we've been talking about for a while now, like privacy or cybersecurity, there's still a lot of work that can be done to help lawmakers understand what is AI, what is the value chain, what are the correct roles and responsibilities to ensure that this technology is successfully utilized and there's uptake. And I think hopefully can all agree, one of the keys to uptake is consumer trust. So that's the work that we've been doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. Really appreciate it. All right. Last but not least, Mr. David Bain. David, we've known each other for many years, but please tell us what you're up to these days and the work that you're doing at the intersection of AI and policy.
Fantastic to be with you all today. Thank you so much, Peter. I am David Bain. I'm serving as the chair of the Technology Integrity Council that invests and supports technology ethics initiatives. I am a former tech startup entrepreneur, and I've known a lot of these folks in different settings, and I'm proud now for the last several years to be serving alongside Microsoft and SC42, the ISO IEC Committee for Artificial Intelligence, as well as the U.S. Secretariat of JTC1, the Joint Technical Committee 1 for the information technology standards overall. But glad to be part of the conversation. My true passion in this conversation, having just wrapped up a project for the Defense Department on the future of artificial intelligence standards internationally. My true passion is the safety and the ethical aspects
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Well, again, as you can see, we have a fantastic panel. Couple of quick housekeeping notes. We're going to push out 4 polls today. I'm actually going to launch the first one right now, which is it's just about a little bit of sentiment about the tools that you're currently using. So please answer this poll and answer you can click any of the tools that you use on a kind of a day in, day out basis. We may not have gotten them all, so please click other. Obviously there are tons more, but these are some of the primary tools, and then we'll look at the answers here in a little bit just to get an idea of what people are using out there on a kind of a day in, day out basis. I definitely have my preferred tools, but I do find myself pleasantly surprised as I'm using more and more of the available AI tools out there. So we'll get that poll going, and we'll look at those results here in a little bit. The other thing I'd like to make sure people do is use the Q&A button down at the bottom of the screen. If you have questions, we will either get to them in real time. If we don't get to them, we'll make sure that we get your questions answered as a follow-up as well. Quick results here. 27 people have, 29 people have, 30 people have taken this poll. Daily use ChatGPT, 94%. The second highest use is Google Gemini, Perplexity, and Bing Chat. No, I don't know why that says Bing Chat Bard. Jamie, Bing Chat and Bard are 2 different products. That's okay. Let's see here. Anthropic, Claude. Yeah, looks like some of the new ones. Great. Others 22. So yeah, I knew there's going to be some other things there. So all right. Looking good. Very cool. All right. And again, we'll share these results as we go on. So when we talk about the 3 pillars, I think about three areas that I want to make sure that people think about, and things that we'll talk about. But one is knowing your policy landscape. So regardless of whether you're a tech startup fielding an AI product, if you're a government agency and you're serving your constituents, or you're a major tech provider, you want to understand the landscape that you play in, right? So there's understanding the policy landscape that you're even in. What do you need to care about? So that you're spending your resources correctly and spending your time correctly. There may be some policy areas that, really don't pertain to you, or there are efforts underway to address those policies in a way that maybe is not as worth as much of your time. The other is identifying the resources that you can leverage in order to enact a policy strategy. So resource accordingly, resource to what it is you need. And I would also say this, it's like I've said this on LinkedIn many times, every company that's involved in AI at some level probably needs an AI policy strategy in place. It's that important, both from an offensive standpoint, from a defensive standpoint. I mean, you just don't want to be caught. And you've already seen multiple examples of companies getting themselves in a little bit of trouble from, leveraging AI, and maybe they're giving away airline tickets or, doing other things, or cars. I mean, you name it. I mean, a lot of stuff has happened. And then it's having enacting a plan, getting yourself involved. So where can you actually take action? And those are kinds of things we're going to talk about today. So, when it comes to the landscape, when it comes to the policy landscape, I would love to go back to, I think I'll go back to Brian first on this one. Brian, when it comes to like understanding the policy landscape, what sort of things are you doing for your members or constituents to like let them know, like, hey, here are the things to care about the most right now with regards to the policy landscape?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot. But the way I guess I think about it is that there are, if you want to call them technology neutral laws, regulations, norms that existed before we were all, before we couldn't escape the term AI being brought up all the time. And and those are, and they apply as much to AI as they do to non-AI use cases. And I know I'm speaking a little bit opaquely there, but just thinking back, before we had an expansive executive order issued by the president relatively recently, which I'll talk about in a second. If none of that had happened, we would still have existing, federal and state laws and regulations that protect consumers generally, prevent unfair and deceptive acts. At the federal level, the Federal Trade Commission is a prime example of a cross-sectoral governance, a cross-sectoral approach to governance that would apply to all kinds of emerging technology and older use cases that don't involve emerging technology. So that's important to consider. And agencies like the Federal Trade Commission have not been shy to remind people that they have a very important role in protecting consumers. If a fraud is perpetuated using, using AI or not AI, that they intend to protect consumers in that respect. There are also sector-specific laws and bodies of regulation that predate, all of the emergence of AI, really. Which, as an example, the Food and Drug Administration regulates medical devices. There's sector-specific regulators for finance, you name it. So that's worth keeping in mind. And in those contexts, the agencies in particular have really been no slouch. They've been very active. So they're developing rules presently, some of which are very developed. One is about to be released in the healthcare space, for example, with respect to discriminatory outcomes by healthcare providers. It's like under 30 days for being developed. So I'm doing that.
Yeah.
I'm raising this to say, that regulation is here today in some form. Layer on top of that, a new executive order from the president about safe and efficacious AI, which, without going into too many details about it, has over 90 things that President Biden is ordering executive agencies to do. Sometimes it's form a council, sometimes it's appoint a chief AI officer for the agency, and all these things have deadlines, and those agencies are meeting and will meet those deadlines. And that's also really, really important as well. There's also a congressional angle, and states are kind of going through this in their own way. And then, as you mentioned, the international aspect, if you're in that market, in those markets abroad, has a huge effect, but also, that there's an influence on what we're dealing with domestically.
So a couple things I heard you is some industries are ahead of others. It seems like the healthcare industry is publishing some regulations in the very near term, and let's make sure we'll keep folks that are on this webinar and our communities writ large abreast of those regulations. How about Kim? I'm sure that a company with Microsoft's resources and heavy investments in AI is really watching the policy landscapes closely. And are you, from a domestic or an international standpoint, are you sort of like equally looking at, the EU Act on AI and I guess the executive orders, but also any pending, regulations, legislation, things that are in the works? How closely are you looking at these?
Yeah, I mean, and we, like you said, we're an enormous company. We have a huge organization full of lawyers. I think our legal org is well over 1,000 people. So it's a little unfair to compare to your average company who doesn't have quite as many resources. But one of the things that my team does in particular when working with standards is that we find that standards are a really good way to provide kind of a baseline to help companies establish their own policies internally for how they want to determine what responsible AI means for them. And in the standard that I mentioned earlier, 42001, one of the things that you have to think about is the context of your organization. What is the policy landscape facing your organization? What are the regulations that you have to comply with? And what are the expectations of your customers? And so this is for an organization that maybe doesn't have the huge amount of resources that a company like Microsoft has, it's a really good way to have some guidance, and especially if your organization has already implemented another management system like 27001, which is quite common and popular for information security management. It really allows organizations to implement and think about policies in a way that are very contextually specific for them, for the size of their organization, for their particular needs related to where they operate. They may only have operations in the US, so they may only need to think about US specific regulations and requirements. But one of the things that we do is that as we work with these standards, we really look at the requirements within them and map them to the regulations that are coming out, not just in Europe, not just in the US, but across the world. So there are things, coming out in Australia and things coming out in Asia. And so to be able to look across the regulatory environment and see where we have gaps, we'll use these standards as a baseline and kind of an index, map the various requirements across the world to that baseline and say, all right, these are all pretty similar. Here's where we have gaps. Here's where we need to focus our attention. Because really, if you look at these things, they're all, they may be talking about it in a little bit different way. One of the common themes is that the difference in the way that some regulators use the concept of risk versus impact. People, I don't want to say misuse,
Right.
but people use those terms in ways that kind of mean the same thing. So you'll get some differences in how those are written into regulations. But if you can take a baseline and then analyze all of the different regulatory requirements or upcoming trends across the world, your organization can get a better idea of what you really need to focus on that is new. Because a lot of the times what we found in the past, this is based on learnings that we had with privacy and GDPR and different privacy regulations across the world, is a lot of times once the big one comes out, like the EU AI Act or GDPR,
Right.
the ones following that are usually pretty similar with a little bit of local flavor thrown in.
Right. Right. And I do. So I'm glad you brought up GDPR because there is some precedent, and I think markets respond, and, especially providers. Are you following kind of a similar path, Danielle, at Salesforce, when you think about GDPR and how that impacted the rest of the world from a marketing standpoint? Does Salesforce see AI regulations kind of similar with, the EU AI Act coming out first, and sort of knowing that it may not get any worse than that? Is that going to be the threshold for AI policy globally?
Yeah, and I think, I'm approaching this a bit differently because I'm just pure policy, not in the standards. So a bit more kind of about shaping what will my attorneys have to adhere to once this is across the finish line and signed. So yeah, the policy landscape has changed, and I'm smiling because, I was in DC for over 12 years, and you would do these meetings on trade secrets or what have you, and sometimes you'd be in the rooms with, older people who had been really around the block a couple of times, and they would talk about, oh, like when I was negotiating NAFTA, or NAFTA rounds or, trade secrets. I don't know. They would have these like policy conversations that they were on the ground floor of. And I would sit there and I'd think, oh my gosh, am I ever going to get my ground floor policy conversation? And I really think I have. And I kind of maybe bit off more than I could chew because it's a global conversation. I mean, I've been on the road quite a bit, went to APAC, had conversations with governments there, have been back to the US to have conversations, and the approaches are different. There are a lot of countries that are looking at AI not as a risk, but instead an opportunity. And so they're not in any real rush to provide hard law approaches to AI, but instead are kind of leaning more on soft law approach, really being a bit more incremental in their approach, trying to see are their privacy laws fit for purpose? Like what's going on with their IP? I mean, look at what Japan's doing. Now, some of these countries may inch towards a hard law approach in some aspects where they feel like their current laws are insufficient, but there hasn't been this rush of laws. And I think what I've been calling like the GDPR effect, it's not been as true for the AI Act. And that's not, I think that the jury is still out. Like when you're talking to governments, I think they're trying to play a wait and see approach. It's not even enforced yet. So like, we don't know what's going to happen. I'm not saying we, more the governments really don't know what's going to go on yet. So there might be at some point a rush of AI legislation. But again, I think a lot of governments are really trying to see, well, how can we use AI to really boost our economies? Like, how can we build some type of tech sector? So, you do see some. Now, that's not to say there's no attention paid to what the EU has done. I mean, it's an incredibly collaborative process, depending upon how you look at it, it's been going on since 2018. I think countries are looking to see what's going on. And so you are seeing some definitions like what you see in the EU AI Act, Canada. So there's so many approaches, honestly. And so Salesforce, we're trying to engage where we can on these issues and to try to talk about interoperability, talk about a risk-based approach, talk about, enterprise AI. What does that really look like? Do you have robust data privacy laws? Like I continue to harp on those, issues because I like to say the more things change, the more they stay the same. I mean, yes, AI does present new challenges, but some of the new challenges are actually not so new. So, so much to talk about in terms of the global. We could probably do a webinar alone on just global developments and like what the implications are and what happens next. But conversations, and everyone wants to know what everybody else is doing. So if I go to the US, they'll ask me what's going on in the EU. If I'm in the EU, they'll ask me what's going on in the US. If I'm in APAC, they're asking me what's going on everywhere. So everyone is interested. Everyone's keeping an ear peeled. It's a great policy environment. Love it.
Well, and now we know the person who's actually going between the US and actually telling everybody what's going on. So Danielle, we appreciate your service.
Not just me.
I know, I'm just playing. All right, I'm going to launch another poll here. We've talked about a few different market segments in this call already. So I'm going to ask folks, what market segment they're in. So please go and tell us which one you're most closely associated with. So public sector, financial services, retail, gaming, entertainment, healthcare, blah, blah, blah. So we put a number of them up there. We might have missed a few. It looks like we got some others coming in. So, but this will give us a sense of, so we got a lot of public sectors, great, healthcare, a lot of others. So anyway, if you could put in the education, let's see, government, public sector should have included education. So apologies. All right. Yes. Higher education. Great. Yeah. So public sector, we would put public sector and education. So public sector, nonprofit, education kind of goes together. Great. If you follow policy folks, well balanced though, I have to say. Nice. Didn't expect gaming and entertainment, to be honest. I didn't expect a lot of attendees on that front. Nice balance. So I'll push these poll results out here in a little bit, but there are a couple of questions that have come in, and We've got one that says, are we seeing any policies from the legal sector? And I know that as an attorney and involved in this conversation, Brian, you may be able to help answer that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it actually, as I think about it, it's as true for, I think, the legal sector as it probably is for others. I mean, first of all, just if you want to read it, I feel sad for the person who went through this, but if you want to read a somewhat entertaining story about someone making a mistake using AI in the legal sector, there is a rather famous case of an attorney in New York State who used ChatGPT to write a submission to a court. And in this case, ChatGPT hallucinated several cases, like the entire case didn't exist, but was cited to as a precedent. And he submitted it to the court, ended up being sanctioned and suspended. And I think they wanted to make an example of him. And that's a very big issue going on in the legal profession. But more broadly, just with legal liability, I thought if I could also maybe speak to that, I think it's the existence that our existing laws and constructs, whether it's tort law or criminal law, or it's some of the agencies I'm talking about who have the same laws they've been using to FDA has been the same laws to regulate medical devices since a long time ago. And they're trying really hard to evolve these within the constructs, the confines that they have within the law. What I see is an increasing risk of, when you look at the supply chain, any given AI supply chain, that the misapplication of some of these existing older laws places undue or too high of a liability or responsibility on one single party. As an example of that, earlier I referenced a regulation about non-discriminatory outcomes in healthcare, right? So here's an example of that. The HHS's Office of Civil Rights is developing a regulation. The only part of that whole value chain, from the product development all the way down to the patient receiving the care, that they can actually touch is the healthcare provider providing care directly to that patient. So what they resolved to do to address AI risks was to put the maximum liability that they could on that provider serving the patient at the end. And their expectation is that that provider will contract away the liability that they have, not recognizing the reality that if like a provider were to go to Epic EHR that was incorporating an AI component and say, well, I want to look at your data set. Can I see your trade secrets? You know, and they're just not going to sell it to them. So it's like an effective lockout. And that's a good example, I think, from the legal side of a risk that is evolving. It might become such a pronounced risk that it could lead to, like law changes by Congress, which would be kind of like a seismic activity, but that those don't seem to be on the horizon right now. Anyway, I could go on and on about that, but that idea, though, that of a shared responsibility throughout the framework, throughout any given value chain, and that somebody should really be looked at to control the risks that they know about and that they can actually do something about. That sounds obvious, but it is not being reflected right now across numerous policy and legal conversations. Very interesting time.
Wow. Yeah, it is. It is an interesting time. And that was a great example. There's Christian Cinzano from Portland has put in a couple of questions. The first one has to do with, are we at risk of overregulation here when it comes to policy versus, providing appropriate data governance tools? And I think that comes down to, David, I think we've talked about this before when it comes to like a good governance versus a regulation sometimes is better. Good governance framework. Can you comment to that? And maybe, that dynamic that, sometimes, you don't want to, throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to regulations. So what's the balance between good governance models and actual regulation or policy?
I think
in this case?
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely, as Danielle was saying earlier, it's the balance that policymakers are trying to strike, and that's common worldwide. They want to address risks at the same time, no one wants to be accused of stifling innovation. And so that's the big challenge. And to bring things back to the pillars of our webinar here, if the first pillar is knowing the landscape, then knowing thyself and where you fit in the landscape and how heavily or lightly regulated your industry is going to be, is, I think, the key to understanding where policymakers will fall in trying to strike that balance.
Also, if I could just really also kind of really
Please,
quickly,
Danielle, absolutely.
this is an interesting question because Stanford's AI body, their like think tank body, they wrote a really interesting paper about the tension that exists between bias monitoring mitigation techniques and existing privacy laws. Because, you know, existing laws and rules around demographic data are quite strict. And so if you can't collect that demographic data, how are you supposed to perform bias testing and mitigation? So there's an inherent tension that exists already within our existing laws and where we kind of need to go to ensure safe AI. I am not a lawmaker, so I can't solve that, but I think if there's one bit of tension in one place, I'm sure there's a couple of other tensions that already
Yeah.
exist. So we're already approaching this question.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I think that we do have a poll question that's kind of related to that with regards to responsible AI. What is most important to people? I'm going to launch this question now, just because you opened that door for us. So it's we provided several answers, and choose the ones that are most responsible for you, to or most resonant with you, and there are so many different, I'd say, battlefronts where this is being fought right now. We look at when I look at the news, and I look at deep fakes, and I look at just the awful stuff that's happening there with regards to deep fakes, right? And I think that the president even mentioned this at the very end of the State of the Union, that he wants to go after deep fakes, and I think for the right reasons, right? That um, but we also know that, in education, for example, virtual humans teaching, courses and things like that, that's very, very popular, or training, corporate training, using, virtual human models is very, very, very important. So there's the legitimate use of virtual humans, but then there's just this awful, the flip side of this, right? So I think that something has to be done there. I think there's some urgency. Also, just bias in AI, obviously. I mean, I think that was probably the biggest thing I experienced very early when ChatGPT was available, was just to sort of, or even Midjourney and DALL-E, is just the bias. It was so clear, right, that our data is biased, and I think that's a huge one as well. So equality, access, and bias are really, really big ones. And it's a challenge when it comes to policy, but let's talk about that, with regards to some of these issues, right? So privacy, reliability, bias and equity of output. Are those things that are on your radar as well, Kim, or is it more to do with, security of information,
No,
protection of IP?
those are absolutely things that are on the radar. And if you not to keep bringing this back to standards, but it's what I do. So
No, it's fine. It's great. It's why we're here.
If you read the 42001 standard that we've created, when we talk about responsible AI, the point of that is trying to get organizations to define their objectives for what responsible AI means. And there's an annex in that standard where we provide some potential objectives. And included in those objectives are things like privacy, reliability, safety, bias and equity of output, what are some other ones? I can't remember the whole list, and they're just examples, but they absolutely align with the things that you have here. So it's you know, security is one of them as well, and that's part of it. But the idea and the concept, and when we were creating this standard, we really wanted to kind of come up with a broad term that encompassed all of these, that could encompass all of these ideas. And that's why we came up with, we wanted the scope of the standard to be responsible AI, because responsible AI allowed organizations the flexibility to determine what that meant for them. What are their objectives for responsible AI? Now at Microsoft, we have a responsible AI organization. They put out our, our pillars of what responsible AI means, and it very much aligns with this. We have, privacy and safety and reliability and fairness, and those are all publicly available. And so those are the types of things that we think about when we think about responsible AI. So in there are many other, frameworks and things out there that include these concepts as part of responsible AI. Some organizations will call it ethical AI. I personally think responsible is a little bit less of a charged word, and maybe a little bit easier to apply broadly to an international environment. But yes, these are kind of the core concepts that the world seems to be cohering on when we talk about the key important things in developing and using AI. And within standards, I work with people from all over the world, and so it's a necessarily an international group, and it's what we're cohering on.
I just pushed out those poll results. It is interesting. Privacy of data used and reliability of information are the top two, and that just seems to be where a big part of any concern lies with regards to AI. And Tess, thanks for your feedback. Next time when we do that poll, we'll make sure that's you can select more than one result. Let's see here. Now I knew this conversation would go very quickly because it feels like we're scratching the surface, and we are coming up on our time. So we'll go with maybe a few minutes over. We have another poll to push out. This is related to your sentiments around access to information for, supporting your AI policy strategy. Oops. I just didn't mean to do that. I just killed that poll, and I want to relaunch it if I can. Let me try. Sorry. Let me see here. Can I do that, Jamie?
I don't know, but I can go in and I can go recreate it if real on the fly.
Jamie's going to recreate that because that's an important poll for us. So we're gonna get that one. So my bad on that. Jamie's going to recreate and push it out. Let's Christian asked another question. We got a few questions here to answer on the Q&A. One of the follow-ups that Christian had was regards to creating policies that can't be enforced. So like government employees or corporate employees in the use of generative AI, right? So little anecdote, side note, I won't share who they are, but I also organize GovAI Summit, govaisummit.com. It's going to happen this fall, but we're also going to do a state and local version in Cary, North Carolina in June. FYI, just a little plug, the call for speakers for all of our events is open till the end of this month. So voiceand.ai or govaisummit.com. If you want to speak at our conferences, please get a talk in. So I was talking to a government employee last fall, and he said, we were talking about this. I mean, so they were not allowed to use ChatGPT on their government laptops, but he said, well, yeah, but we have, we feel like we have to use it now. Like it's a tool that we have to be able to leverage and use. So, to this point that Christian makes, if there's a policy against using a particular AI tool, it just seems people are still going to use it. So does it make sense to create policies that we know maybe sidestepped? one question, and I'll take another one here. Have we heard about the fairly trained certification? So I don't know if anyone wants to comment on either of those two questions, and then I'm going to get to this last one and read it while we're answering. Who wants to take either one of those?
I will take the first one. There's so many different ways to answer this question, because I was on another panel and they were asking about how can smaller companies up level their AI program. And I talked about NIST, the AI RMF, or Singapore's framework as well. There's a couple of different frameworks going around, and that's technically policy. And a lot of it's voluntary. Part of the reason why we should have these policies is because some industries and some entities are looking to act responsibly. Why? I mean, for a company like Salesforce, we operate on trust. I mean, our customers are putting their trusted data on our platform. And if they don't trust us with that data, they're not going to use our product. So for us, it is incumbent upon us, and it is very urgent for us to look at these public frameworks and other documents and policies that people can kind of trust have been created with some type of integrity, and say like, okay, well, we adhere to this, or we align with this. I think it's kind of, it has like a knitting effect of the industry having the ability to provide feedback to the government to ensure that policies come out that then the industry itself can then speak to increase trust or responsible development of these technologies, and then hopefully increase uptake. I'll also say the interesting thing about policies also on the government side, procurement rules. Companies are going to have to compete for those procurement contracts, and in doing that, they're going to also have to adhere to a certain standard of data governance and security. And so, that also raises all ships. So these policy conversations, even in the case that they're voluntary or there's something that not everybody is going to be able to participate in, like procurement, it starts setting a standard or better yet, setting a foundation for norms and best practices that I think will mature the responsibility of technologies like AI.
Very, very good. Kim, you've got your hand
Yeah,
up.
I'll just add on really quickly to what Danielle said. I think when you have internal policies as well, to Christian's point, I think it's always important when there's a policy like that that's not working. It's always important to examine it and take a risk-based approach. If looking at the real risk of, what is the risk to using an AI tool, and examining the elements of that risk. So I know that there are some AI tools now, like ChatGPT, Bing with ChatGPT, that can be that you can use enterprise versions of, that are tailored to your enterprise and your enterprise data, that may be lowering the risk of what your employees are using it for. So I think that's an important approach, and with all of this whole conversation about AI is always taking a risk-based approach to it. Not everything has to be scary and terrifying. It's all about what the risk is, what the use case, what the intended use for the particular AI tool is. So that's always something I think really important to keep in the back of your mind.
Thank you so much, Kim. That's well noted. I'm going to share the results of this poll. I'm not actually totally surprised that the policy landscape is challenging. That's why we're having this conversation. And we're going to make information to this group available to you. So we are going to do some follow-ups, and there are some immediately available resources to you. I would just note that, like actonline.org, which is the domain for ACT, the App Association, they have a free membership to join their organization, and then get on their newsletter and get access to all the things that they're working on, because they're the tip of the spear. They're also standing up as I understand, an AI steering committee. And that is a powerful resource to join and be a part of, and we'll get you information on that steering committee as well. And let's see here. David, as he said, sits on several of the standards bodies and industry groups, travels around the world and meets up with Kim and Danielle at various standards meetings. So just the team on this call, we can provide a number of resources that you can at least access and use in your day-to-day kind of policy strategy. As we close up here, we've got a couple more questions that were in the Q&A. Let me get to them here. Let's see here, Q&A, just to wrap up. Yeah, different companies, different countries will adopt various different yeah. How are we going to avoid governments from the technology falling into the wrong hands? Yeah, well, we're in an interesting time. I think, Grazia, definitely, that is a very good question. And do we envision a global AI treaty similar to the Non-Proliferation Treaty? I would push that to the folks that are involved internationally on policy. Are those kinds of things talked about, Danielle and Kim, on the international global front, kind of a UN level sort of agreement? And Brian, you've got your hand raised. Maybe you know something on this front. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. I was just going to say, it is quite high level, but the United Nations has adopted a resolution only, I think, a few days ago with respect to, ethical use of AI and that it should align with legal frameworks. I know that, again, these things seem obvious, but that is the first resolution that the United Nations has, formally adopted.
If you could send that to us, we're going to make sure that gets part of our follow-up when we send it out. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
So the UN is getting involved.
Yeah, it is. And there's some various, there's also, I guess people call them multilateral fora, which I know that might sound like gobbledygook, but the idea is that it's these, if you've heard of the OECD, for example, which is kind of like the collection of developed nations. It's like a mini UN for just some world, I guess you could say. You'll have fora like that, which have some pretty intense policy work underway. I think I see discussion of it in regional trade agreements, such as the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, as well. So there's a lot of discussion about it. I don't know if a detailed like treaty that would dictate changes in people's domestic law is like imminent. Probably isn't, but it is absolutely talked about.
I also don't, I think there'll be some different approaches. I think back to our conversation around the GDPR effect, definitions are hard. I think lawmakers do like to at least look at, be able to reference best practices. I think you saw that with the OECD definition around AI. That was often quoted in several different bills on both sides of the Atlantic. So I don't know if there will be huge deviations in the international community. I don't know yet. I really, really don't know. I think I may be heartened by the fact that when I go into meetings, a lot of governments are asking, what are others doing? Is this a best practice? Does this definition deviate too much? There's a lot of conversations around interoperability. Like, as Brian said, there's so much work at the OECD, APEC, ASEAN, G7 has a code of conduct that has about now, I think, 12 principles, and there's a code that's coming after those principles. I think governments there's also the UK AI Safety Summit, and there was broad agreement there on some high level issues, right? So I'm not saying that there's agreement on the nitty gritty here, but there is some broad agreement. And I think importantly, the intention is there. So governments are reaching towards another to learn and see where they are, which maybe I'm just being way too optimistic. I think that's actually really great.
Well, thank you so much, Danielle. And I'm going to, in the interest of keeping time here, we went a little over our planned 45 minutes, but I'm so glad we did because there is so much to cover here. And just real quick, maybe parting thoughts from our guests here. I'll start with you, David. And maybe just maybe a forward-looking statement, or something important you want to leave our guests with.
Well, yeah, thank you, Pete. The parting thought I think I would like to leave with you is that the whole world is focused on this. It is essential for national security and international stability. And the busy Venn diagram of international organizations that are inputting their ideas into what will eventually become humanity's future, collective conscious, how it regards this domain. The ideas and abstractions like risk-based management, they're coming from all different parts, some earlier, some later, and that synthesis of how the adoption is taking place is something that we're going through right now as and this period that we're in right now is essential and important because the AI is getting so much more powerful. So we need to figure this out, how to manage it well. The thing that gives me the greatest hope and the idea that I'm most enamored with right now is the approach that Anthropic takes. It's called what is it called? Responsible RPC. I forget what the acronym is, but
Get it out to everybody. Somebody quick, look that up. Ask Perplexity.
The idea is you got to have the tool. You can't release something on the wild into the wild until you have demonstrated, not just on paper, but in practice, the tools to responsibly and effectively manage what you're putting out there. So that's my parting thought. Next.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. And Kim and Danielle set you up because Grazia just made a point that governments may not be able to move fast enough, and it's up to some of our large companies to help us with the way forward. And I'm heartened to hear that there are 1,000 people working on policy at Microsoft. And Danielle, I don't know how many working on it at Salesforce, but I would welcome both your parting thoughts as we go to close up here. Kim, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think for me, the most important thing is that, organizations just, and I think someone in the chat or the questions made a comment about, not being scared of this and embracing it. And I think that's really important to remember, is that there are a lot of really good things that can come from AI. However, it's important for organizations to be prepared. And I would really encourage them to, whether it's 42001, whether it's the NIST AI RMF, look into frameworks and policies and things that your organization can adopt to prepare your organization, because there are going to be regulations and requirements and customer expectations around this. And if you don't have the appropriate things in place in your organization and the guardrails and the risk assessments done, then you're going to be really far behind and it's going to be hard to catch up. So start thinking about it now and get those policies and procedures in place organizationally.
Thank you so much, Kim. Well, I have noticed that most people have stayed with us this entire time. They're not getting off the call. So we will be having a follow-up webinar, I think, in sooner than later to really continue this conversation. Danielle, thank you so much for dialing in with us from London, England. We know it's late there for you. Please give us your parting thoughts today.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this. I mean, Kim honestly took the words right out of my mouth. I think really understanding where you sit in this, space. Like, what is your role in the AI value chain? Like, are you paying attention to the laws? And if that's too overwhelming, I mean, there's if you're just in the US, the US has a lot of developments. Look at your states. Look at it, take it bit by bit, incremental approach. You don't have to go straight to the EU AI Act. I think it's okay to look at the frameworks, the voluntary aspects that governments have already put out. And then if you stay in spaces like this, you'll hear like California's developing an approach on AI. Like there are so many developments happening, but if you just stick with what's accessible, I think that this is a lot more it's not so scary or intimidating, but it is important to pay attention to these issues like privacy, like bias. So, trying to just take it bit by bit, I think is really important.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Danielle. That's great advice. Mr. Scarpelli, you're going to wrap us up.
All right, I'll be quick. Stand between us and the end here. But thanks everyone. Again, really pleased to be here. I think across these different use cases, there already, I think, should be some consensus that all of us can come together on, that we've talked about here. And that's really encouraging. The idea that the steps taken in an AI use case to mitigate a potential harm would scale to the severity of the harm presented. The idea of a shared responsibility across an AI value chain for efficacy and safety and bias mitigation. I think those are really important foundations we can run with. As I hope everybody can kind of has been impressed that it's really important to raise your awareness as best you can. I know it is extremely complex. There are also, admittedly, a lot of, not to besmirch my own profession, lawyers and consultants who benefit from that complexity because only they can solve that problem for you, right? But there are resources out there. My association offers them. I know that the other speakers, organizations here offer them, and et cetera, and take advantage of those and get involved now and make your voice heard. Because if we sit back and wait to react to a government proposal, it's going to be in response to a terrible, severe incident. Like, think about this this is something to keep in mind. All of the news stories are presently saying that it was human error that caused that container ship to crash into a bridge in Baltimore. But what if it had not been? And what would the reaction be from Congress, from a state government, right? And we'd be reacting to all that. So we got to be proactive and get out in front of this stuff. That's certainly a priority for us, and I urge everybody else to do that too. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. It is time for everybody to get involved in the policy conversation. That's why this has become a priority for us at Modev. It's a priority for our conference this fall, GovAI Summit, and our state and local version of that conference as well as Voice in AI. Everybody needs to be involved in the policy conversations because this is our industry. And we're serving our customers, and we want to do so in ways that's responsible, but we also want to promote our industry, and we want to make really cool products and help shape the future. The policy conversation is more important than ever. So thank you so much for joining us today. By joining us today, you did get involved. So we will be following up with a detailed email with links to resources, everything that's been discussed today. If we didn't get to your questions, please know that we'll do our best to answer them in a follow-up. And thank you again to our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. Kim had to drop off for another call. Danielle, thank you. Brian, thank you. David, thank you. Thanks to our team for doing everything in the background. Jamie and Jess, thank you so much for your help running the show here today. I'm Pete Erickson with Modev. Thank you for joining us. This is the end of our policy webinar. Thank you.